Now we want to shift our focus back to the details page. When we hit Add to Cart, we want to save our shopping cart in the database. If a user is logged in, we will have their application user ID and we can save that in our shopping cart database. So first we need to make sure we create a new model for our shopping cart. Inside Solution Explorer, let's go to Models and I will create a new class for shopping cart. This will be a public class, and what will be all the properties that we will need? First we need a unique ID, so let's call that as ID. Next we need to know what is the menu item that user wants to add to their shopping cart. So we can do prop, that will be an int as well, and it will be menu item ID. We need count of the menu item that user wants. So we will have an integer count, and finally we need the user ID. User ID, as we saw in ASP.NET User, is a string and not an integer. That's why this will be string. We will call that application user ID. Then with count, if we go back to the details page inside customer, we already have the range validation. Let me cut this and I will paste it right here. We will add the using statement. The menu item ID and the application user ID, both of them will be foreign keys to the corresponding table. We saw in the menu item how we can add foreign key to category and food type. So here we can create something similar for the navigation property. We will first have foreign key attribute. Let's add that. Let's add the using statement, and this will be menu item. Let's call it the same. Then the foreign key that we have, that will be menu item ID. Let me copy and paste that. I will copy this and paste it one more time for application user ID. The navigation class here will be application user, and let's give it the same name. Once we add the shopping cart with navigation property, let's create a table for our shopping cart. For that, we will go to the application DB context, not application user. Inside data access, we have the DB context. Here we will be adding a new DB set for shopping cart. Once we add this, let's build the project to make sure everything is working as expected. Perfect. Now we need to add migration. So we will add the migration, add shopping cart to DB. That will create shopping cart. When we add that, it is actually increasing the size for tokens in multiple places, and then it creates the shopping cart. So shopping cart has two foreign key, one with the application user and one with menu item. Both of them has referential action as cascade. That looks good. Let me run the command update database. And perfect. Our shopping cart would have been created. If we go back to SQL Server, refresh the tables, we have shopping cart, which will have 4 columns. Now in the next video, let me configure the repository for shopping cart. In this video, we want to create the shopping cart repository. That is pretty simple, and we have done that multiple times. So let me copy category repository and we will implement that real quick. So this will be shopping cart repository. Let me copy the name and we will modify here. The model will be shopping cart. That looks good for the interface. Let me copy the category repository and paste that for shopping cart repository. We will copy the name there. Let's modify the shopping cart here. Even though I have added the update method here, we won't be updating anything in the shopping cart like that. So I can remove the update and keep things very simple. We will add new methods in the upcoming videos, but right now it will be pretty basic. Next change that we have to do is inside unit of work, and our unit of work we will be adding the iShoppingCart repository. That looks good for iUnit of work. Let me actually copy this, go back to unit of work. We will create public iShoppingCart repository, which will have getter and private setter. We need to create the shopping cart here is equal to new shopping cart repository with the application DB context. So that looks good and our repository is in place. With that, let me close all the tabs here and continue from the next video. Now that we have added the repository for shopping cart, we need to work on the details page. So let me minimize everything else and open the details page model. The onGet handler looks good for now. But rather than adding menu item and count here, we can directly bind everything together with the shopping cart that we created. Because our shopping cart has the menu item ID, count, and it also has the application user ID. When the user submits the Add to Cart button on the details page, we actually want to create a record inside the shopping cart. So to make things easy, we will just create one object of shopping cart rather than integer and menu item. Then you can use the bind properties, or you can just use bind property because we only have one property on this page model right now. Inside the onGet, we will just create a new object. So shopping cart is equal to new, and then we want to assign our menu item inside there. So with that, the get handler should work the same. Let me right click here, go to the page, and we will make sure to modify the details here, because now this will be inside model.shoppingcart.menuitem. So we will have to add the .shoppingcart before menu item in all the places. And perfect. I believe all the errors should be resolved. Let's run the project to make sure everything is running as expected. We have few errors here. Let me see that. If we go to the right side, we do not need the semicolon. We will remove that. And we will add the semicolon after shopping cart. Let's run this and see if we have any other errors here. Let's take a look at them. Now sometimes you will see error messages where if you click, nothing will happen. You can see right here, if you click, nothing happens. But you can see the error is inside details.cshtml. So let's go there and examine if we find something that is weird. Since everything here is looking good, let me try one thing. I will just comment out all the code and build the project. That worked, so that means we should have something else that is going on in here. So let me try to comment the cart body here and see if that works. That also worked. That means something is wrong inside the cart body. Let's expand that, and this time let me try this small column 12 here, comment it out, build the project. That also worked. So this way we have the issue within these few lines. Let me uncomment the code and try to build it one more time here. This time it fails again, so something is wrong within these 10 lines. And now that I examine it properly, we do not have the count anymore. If we go to the details here, we removed the count, and that count is inside shopping cart. So that is exactly why it is failing. Now we need to go inside shopping cart, and there we have the count. Once we paste that for our count, and if we build the project, it should work. Perfect. So sometimes with Razor views, you will face issues when the errors are not self-explanatory. So in order to debug them, you can comment the code out and narrow it down to find out where exactly it is failing. If you go to details here, perfect, this is working. Now when we hit the add to cart button, we want to create an entry in the shopping cart with the user ID of the user that is logged in. So we need to make sure that if a user is not logged in, they need to log in first when they hit the add to cart button. Let's do that in the next video. Now we have seen authentication in our application, but I want to show you authorization and how that will work. Authentication basically means that a user is able to sign in the application. And authorization means that once a user is signed in, do they have access to that particular page? What we want to implement is the details page that you see right here is only accessible to an authorized user. And to implement that authorization, it is super simple. You can authorize a user based on role. Like let's say there are some pages that only admin can access, then you can authorize that to only users with the role of admin. But if you want to any user that is authorized in an application, that basically means that as long as the user is signed in, they can access this page. To give that access to the details page, we can stop the application, and we will do that at the page model level. Right here, you can add the authorize attribute, and you will add the using statement microsoft.asp.NET Core.authorization. That attribute must be applied at the page model level, and it cannot be applied to the individual page handlers. With that attribute, let me run the application and show you what happens now. So we have our home page that is loaded. If we click on View Details without logging in, it should redirect us to Login page. But if we click View Details, it will be a little bit different. It takes us to some page which is Account, Login with a return URL. What is happening here? This is the default route. If we go to our Solution Explorer, inside Areas, Identity Pages, we have the Account folder, and that has the login page. So the last two things are valid here, but this is the default route. When we changed that from default identity and we added the custom identity, we have to set the cookies for some of the default redirect path like access denied, login, and so on. So how do we set those custom paths? We will have to set that in the application cookies, which will be inside program.cs file. So where we have the builder, on builder we have services dot, we have the configure application cookie, and here we have some options. The options that we want to configure is options dot, we have the access denied path. The one that we are working on right now is the login path. So the login path is different. It is inside the identity area. In there we have the account folder and we have the login page. You can copy this and paste it few more times. Next path that we want to change is the logout path. That is inside account. We have the logout page. Let me show that here. If I pin this inside account, we have login and logout. Similarly, we have the access denied path that is inside account. We have the page of access denied. These three paths are sufficient for now, but if throughout the application we find some weird URL, we can define the default cookie paths inside the program class file. With that, let me run the application one more time. This time, if we hit the details button, it will redirect us to the correct login page and we have the return URL. So let me log in with our email for customer user, and perfect. As long as the user is logged in, they are authorized and they will be able to access this page. Next, we want to work on Add to Cart functionality. Let's do that in the next video. Now, if a user is authorized, they are able to access the details page. But when we click the Add to Cart, we want to get the menu item ID, the count that user entered here, as well as the user ID of the logged in user. So first and foremost is how will we get the user ID of the logged in user. Let's go to the details page model and let me copy the onGet handler. I will paste it one more time. For the onPost handler, we won't need any parameter here because we have binded the shopping cart. Inside the details, when we post on the button click, we will require the menu item ID. But we do not have that, so we will need an input field. We will have to bind that for is equal to, we have the shopping cart dot menu item dot ID, and this will be a hidden property. So with that, we have the menu item ID here, we have the count here, but we still need the application user ID. That we will retrieve directly inside the page model. We know that the onPost will only be received if the user is logged in. So as long as the user is logged in, the default user object is always populated. So we can fetch all the claims inside the claims identity variable, and this will be equal to, we will have to typecast a claims identity and add its using statement here. We want to cast the user.identity. Before I do anything else, let me add a debugging point here and show you what exactly happens. So let me remove everything else and add the debugging point. Our user is logged in. Let's go to the details, add count here, hit add to cart. Perfect. If we press F10 here, so if we examine the claims identity, inside claims, we have the first one here, which is name identifier. So you can see the claim type is name identifier, and that has the value of our user ID. So first we need to extract the name identifier out of all the claims. So to do that, we will say variable claim is equal to claims identity dot. We can use find first in there, and we need the claim type of name identifier. So we have claim types dot name identifier. Then the user ID we need to populate inside shopping cart dot application user ID, and that will be inside claim dot value. This is one way of retrieving the user ID of a logged in user. So perfect. Let me stop the application, and now we have the user ID populated inside the shopping cart object. We already have the menu item and the count populated, so we will say underscore unit of work dot shopping cart dot add. We want to add the shopping cart entry, and we want to save the changes. Once we are done with all of this, we can redirect to the index page, and this time we will have to change the return type to iActionResult. Let me remove the debugging point here and run the application to see what happens. I am logged in here. Let's go to the details tab. I will add 5 count here and hit add to cart. We get an exception here which says cannot insert explicit value for identity column in table menu item. Now why is it inserting anything inside the menu item table? For that, let me stop the application, go back to the details right here, and whenever we post anything, we must check if the model state is valid or not. So we'll say if model state is valid, only then proceed further and do all the changes. Also, the redirect to page will be inside the model state. If that is not valid, we will just return back to the page. Let's run the application and see what happens with our model state. I will add the debugging point, and let's go to the details here. Let's increase count, add to cart. You can see the model state will be false. Let's examine which properties are false. We will see the result view here, and you can see the application user ID, and we have the menu item which has name, image, price. All of that is invalid. Now why is it trying to validate the subproperty of menu item? We do not want those validation. So sometimes when validations are not required, it tries to validate them, and here since the menu item ID is 0, it is trying to create a new menu item. That is not what we want. So how do we avoid that? Let me stop the application. We know that we will never create a menu item from the shopping cart. So if we go to our model where we have shopping cart and menu item, right here we can add an attribute which is not mapped. That will make sure that it never tries to map the menu item to anything in database and create a new record. We can do the same thing with application user. We also do not want any validations when it comes to menu item ID or application user ID. If there is some property which you do not want in model state, you can use validate never as the attribute which is inside microsoft.asp.netcore.mvc.core. That will make sure that it is never validated. If you remember all the validations, it was also trying to validate the application user ID. What we can do for that is the user ID that we are populating to our shopping cart. We can do that on the get handler itself. So that means that our shopping cart object will have the application user ID. Let me cut that and paste it here. Now once we have that inside the get handler, when we are on the page, we can add that to a hidden property. So right here we have the application user ID, and when the form is posted, our shopping cart will already have that populated. So with that, let's add debugging point here and run the application. Let me scroll down to the details here and try to add a count of 2. Our model state now is valid, but I want to show you one thing. If we go to model state here, and if we examine the result view, you can see it is trying to validate the menu item.id, but the validation state is skipped. That is because we explicitly told not to validate menu item. So you can see how we can skip some things if needed. Let me hit continue, and when it tries to save the changes, we see a new error in which the foreign key constraint conflicted with the menu item. Let me go to SQL Server and try to examine what exactly is going on here. Our menu item is a foreign key to menu item. Let me hit continue here. Let's go back and try the add to cart one more time. Let me examine the shopping cart that is being added. We have the count, we have the application user ID, but the menu item ID is null. That should never happen. What exactly are we doing here? We have hidden property of menu item.id. We need the menu item ID inside the shopping cart. So we need to make a couple of changes here. First is when we are loading the shopping cart here, we want to populate the menu item ID with the ID that we receive in parameter here, because that will be the menu item ID. Once we populate that inside the menu item ID, inside details, when we are adding a hidden property, that will be for the menu item ID and not menu item.id. With those two changes, let me save everything and run the application. With that, I believe we should be able to create our first shopping cart item. Let's go to the details here, and we will change the count to 2. Let's add that. Our model state is valid. Let's examine the shopping cart. It has count, menu item ID, and the user ID. Let me do F5 to continue, and perfect. Looks good. To validate everything, let me switch back to SQL Server. Let me execute select top 1000, and perfect. We have the shopping cart inside database. Let's continue from the next video. Now that we have added an entry inside our shopping cart table, what if a user goes back to the application and goes to the same menu item, clicks on View Details, and adds 2 more items to the shopping cart? Right now, what will happen is it will create a new record inside the shopping cart table. We do not want that. What we want is rather than creating a record, it will just increment the count to the new number. So how can we accomplish that and use the same record? Because ideally there should only be one record for a menu item ID and a user ID. Only the count should be updated every time more items are added for that same menu item in the shopping cart. When we were implementing the shopping repository, we did not implement any update method. And the reason was that I wanted to implement different custom method for the shopping cart repository, which is to increment the count and decrement the count. So let me open up the iRepository for shopping cart here, and I will be adding 2 methods. Both of them will return an integer, and it will receive the shopping cart object as parameter and the count by which we will increment or decrement the record. Let's implement that inside the shopping cart repository. We should see the squiggly lines here. Let's implement the interface. This interface should be pretty simple. We will just say shopping cart.count minus equal to the count that is supplied here, and we will return the shopping cart.count. Let me scroll down here, copy this, and paste it one more time here. We will add plus inside increment. We will just add that. Now when we increment or decrement anything, it makes sense to save the changes. So typically I like to avoid saving changes directly in the repository and do that where we are calling the code. But increment and decrement is some functionality which is like a default behavior. So if you want, in some scenarios, you can also save the changes directly in the repository. With that, let me save all the changes, and let's go back to details.cshtml. And let's go back to the details page model. Now on the post, when we receive a request, we need to find out if there is any request for that shopping cart inside our database already. We will create a shopping cart. Let me call that shopping cart from dp is equal to underscore unit of work dot shopping cart dot get first dot default. We want to find that based on the user ID. So u.application user ID is equal to the shopping cart dot application user ID. That is not the only condition that we want. We also want to make sure that the menu item is the same. So and we will say u.menu item ID is equal to shopping cart dot menu item ID. If there is any record with both of these conditions being true, that means that the record already exists and we just need to increment the counter with the new count that user wants. Now what you added right here is the function that we have for filter. So you remember inside our repository we added filter. That is exactly how we are filtering our record. This is the same condition that you can use with Entity Framework using the where clause. We have made our generic repository so it can handle all the complex scenarios. So once we do that, we will check here if shopping cart from dp is null, In that case, we will create the shopping cart and save the changes. If that is not null, then we just want to update. So inside else, we have unit of work dot shopping cart dot increment count. We want to increment our shopping cart from DB, and by how much do we want to increment? That is inside shopping cart dot count. And then we do not have to save the changes because we are doing that inside the increment count. With that, let me run the application and see if this works. I'll remove the debugging point here. Let me switch back to SQL Server. The record that we have is for menu item ID 7. Now let me go to the details. This ID is 5. If I add 5 here and hit add to cart, it should create a new record. That is perfect. Let's go to the menu item ID of 7. Which one was that? Right here. And let's try to add 3 more. We already have 2 here, so let's see what happens. The correct behavior is the count should now be 5 for both the menu item. And perfect. That is exactly what happens. So our update functionality is working fine with the view details. Next thing, inside the header, I want to display a shopping cart which user can click and navigate to see all the items in their shopping cart. Let's do that in the next video. Now we want to create a page for shopping cart where user can navigate and see all the items in the shopping cart. So let me stop the application here, and inside Solution Explorer, we'll go to our web project, and inside the cart folder, we will create a new Razor page which will be empty index.cshtml. This will be the index page for shopping cart. Let me close all the other tabs here, and I will open the page model as well. Now if you think about that, what will be the property that we will need for this page? That will be a collection of the shopping cart. Because for a user, there can be more than one shopping cart. We want to display all of them. So right here, we'll have a prop, which will be IEnumerable. Let me do control dot here to add system.collection.generics, and this will be an IEnumerable of the shopping cart model. Let me call this a shopping cart list. We will have to populate the shopping cart list inside the get handler. Let me go back and open the details page model. We will require the unit of work. Let me copy and paste that here, and make sure to change the constructor name, add the using statement. Inside the get handler, we will need the user ID. Based on that, we can request all the items of shopping cart for that user. So to get the user ID of the logged in user, we will use our claims identity again. Let me paste it here. And this page also will be an authorize only page. So let me do authorize here and add control dot for the using statement. Claims identity will also require the using statement. So here, if claim is not null, this means it is an authorized user. In that case, we can populate the shopping cart list from unit of work dot shopping cart dot get all. We want to filter condition, so we can define filter here. U goes to u dot application user ID must be equal to claim dot value. Based on that, the shopping cart will be populated. And once that is populated, it will redirect us to the details page where we can display everything from the shopping cart. Let's do that in the next video. Now inside the cart folder, we have added the page for shopping cart, which is index.cshtml. Inside customer, we have the cart folder, and there we have the page. So let's go to our underscore layout and add a navigation to that Razor page. We can copy one of the existing anchor tag here. We will create a new li element and paste the anchor tag. Here we want to display a cart icon. So let me open up the Bootstrap icons here and we will search for shopping cart. We have the cart right here. Let me copy this and we will paste that inside the anchor tag. When a user clicks here, we want to navigate to customer folder. We have the cart folder and we have index page. Now let me open up the page model, not home folder. We need the page model for cart. So let me close that. Since the name of the Blazor pages are same, make sure you are working on the correct page. So inside the get handler, if we scroll down, we are retrieving the user ID of the logged in user, and based on that we have the complete list of shopping cart. So inside the index UI, we need to display the shopping cart. Since we will be adding HTML and CSS, I have provided snippets. This time we are inside section 9. We have the shopping cart UI. Let me open that, copy everything, and we will paste it right here. If you examine the code that I have, it is purely HTML and CSS and nothing related to C# or Blazor code is present in the file. Let me select all and format everything using Ctrl+K and Ctrl+F. With this in place, let me run the project and take a look at the output that we have with our styling. If you expand this, you will notice we have a shopping cart icon that is hidden right here. So to make that visible first, let me go back to the underscore layout and the class here, let me change that from drop-down item to nav link and we will say text white 50. Let's save that and refresh. Perfect, this looks much better. Now if you click on the cart here, it will take us to the new page. But that page is only for authorized user. If we go back, inside the page model, we have the authorized tag. So we must log in here. Let me log in using our manager account and see what happens. Perfect, the page loads. We have shopping cart here, a button to continue shopping, and a button to proceed to summary. We have the list of menu items right here. So rather than this dummy data, we want to populate all the items in our shopping cart. If we go back, we have the list of shopping cart inside the page model. So inside index.cshtml, let me find out where we have the iteration. It's after the image here. We'll scroll down. The image tag is right here. So this row is responsible for displaying all the menu items in the cart. So right before this row, we will add a for each loop and we want to iterate through each item. Inside our model, we have the shopping cart list. So that will iterate through each individual shopping cart. We can close that after the HR tag right here. Then for each one of them, let's add the details. Image will be inside item.menuitem.image. Let me copy the item.menuitem prefix. Next we have the name, which will be inside item.menuitem.name. Category name, inside menu item, we have the navigation property for category and we can extract the name. Similarly, we have food type. Price is inside menu item.price and count is directly inside the item, which is shopping cart. We have the plus icon, we have the minus icon, and we have the trash icon right here. Let me save this, go back and refresh to see what happens. Our shopping cart is empty for this user. Let's go to the home page and add some items to the shopping cart. As soon as we hit the shopping cart, you will see an exception. Perfect, you can see we have an exception with the menu item.image. I want you guys to pause this video and try to figure out what is happening here. What is happening is if we go to the cshtml.cs, when we are populating the shopping cart list, we only have the details inside the shopping cart, which is menu item ID, application user, and count. We do not have any other details related to menu item. So how do we fix that? Now when we are loading the shopping cart, we want to populate our menu item. So you might recall that we can easily do that using our include statement when we are using getAll. So right here we can add a comma here, and I can say include properties. I want to include menu item here. That will be great. But what we have to do is, if you examine the CS.html, we also want the category and food type to be populated. And these are not directly inside menu item. We need to include that navigation property inside menu item. If we just say that load menu item, it will not load any navigation properties that are inside menu item. If I go back to the repository that we have the DB set right here where we said include. If we want to include multiple levels here, like let's say we have menu item, this will not be menu item, this will be shopping cart. If we want to do that directly on the application DB context, we will include menu item, and on there we have a different method which is then include. So if we have any child elements on menu item, we have to use the then include to include those child elements when the data is loaded. But in our case of repository, if we go to the query.include, if you try to write then include here, it will not work, because then include is not available when you pass a string right here. It is only available with the lambda expression. So now you might be thinking, is that a limitation in our repository and we will not be able to do that? Of course not. We always want our repository to handle all the scenarios. You can still do the same functionality with include properties. The only difference here is with comma separated, you will first have to write the parent element, which is menu item, and then dot we can write food type. Similarly, we will say menu item dot category. That way it will load menu item and then the child elements inside menu item. Once that is done, let me add a debugging point here and run the application. We already added items to our shopping cart, so once this loads, we can click on the shopping cart here. If we continue here, we will see an error message. You can see it is unable to find the navigation menu item. Now what could be the reason behind that? We have menu item here. If we go take a look at our shopping cart model, we will have the navigation property of menu item. So why is it not able to navigate and populate this menu item? The reason behind that is we have added not mapped. If you add a not mapped property, then the property that you are added, if that is a navigation property, that will not be mapped. We only did not want to include them in validation, so validate never is sufficient. Not mapped should be used in scenarios where you do not want any navigation properties to be mapped and populated. But if you do want that, then we will have to remove those properties from menu item and application user. Let's run the project and test that again. We will click our shopping cart. Let me press F10 again, and it seems it is populated. We have two items here. If you examine, it has the menu item populated and the category as well as food type is populated. So it is able to load the navigation properties and also the child elements of that navigation property because we specified the complete name. When we hit continue here, we will see the UI with all the details that we modified. So perfect, we have the price here, the count here, name, category, and food type. Let's continue working on this in the next video. Now before we work on the plus, minus and delete buttons here, let me display order total right here. We can do that in multiple ways. One way of doing that is we can add a new property here, which will be a double. Let me call that as cart total. When we are calling the onGet here, we can loop through all of the object inside the cart list and calculate that order total. So here we can say for each statement, variable cart item in shopping cart list, we will say cart total plus equal to, we want to do some calculation. First we will get the cart item dot menu item dot price, and we will multiply that by cart item dot count. That will do the calculation and populate our cart total. Inside the constructor here, we can initialize the cart total to be 0. Then if we go to our view or UI here, we are displaying cart total at the very end here. We will just use the @ sign. We have model.cartTotal. With that, let me go back and refresh. And of course, this won't work. We will have to restart our application. Then if we go on the shopping cart, you can see the cart total is calculated based on the count and price. So perfect, that is working as expected. Before we work on buttons to change quantity and remove the item, let me add a link here to navigate back to the index page so that user can add more items to the shopping cart. So if we go back to the application, we have that link continue shopping right here. So what will be the href for this particular link? If we do href here, let's examine first on where we want to return. When we are on the button, we are inside the cart folder. So from cart folder, we need to navigate one level up inside the customer folder. To navigate one level up, we will have to use one single dot and a /. So with that, we will be inside the parent folder of cart, which is the customer folder now. Inside customer folder, we want to go to the home folder. So we can write home and then we will write index. Let me save this, go back and refresh and click continue shopping. Perfect, that worked as expected. Now if you do not want to navigate using this and you want to use it from the root path of pages, you can just use a tilde sign here and that will take you to the default page of pages. So if we save this and if we go back and refresh, you will see the URL now is directly home index. So if you are using that, then we need to give the complete path that it is inside customer, home and index. With that, it should work as expected. So you can see there are multiple ways to accomplish routing, so make sure to play around and get more familiar. Let's implement the plus, minus and delete buttons inside our shopping cart. Typically what we have seen so far is there is only one post handler. So when we post a form, it goes to that default post handler that we have. But in this particular scenarios, we want to implement 3 different post handlers so that way they can handle the individual request. Let me stop the application here and first let me go to the index.cshtml. Let me identify the 3 buttons that we have right here, and you know we have a form here, so everything that you have here with type of submit will be posted. So in order to define a custom handler and not use the default on post handler with buttons, we have a tag helper which is ASP page handler. That way we can define a custom handler. Let me call this plus. Now when we are editing something, we always take the ID. In this case also, we will require ID so that we know which count needs to be incremented or decremented. So we will be passing ASP route, and let's not use the generic ID here. Let's use a different name, cart ID. Cart ID will be inside item.id. If we go back to SQL Server And if we examine our shopping cart here, the ID that we are talking about is this particular ID, which is the primary key for the shopping cart table. So that is great. We have added a new handler and we are passing the cart ID. Let me do that for the other buttons. The next handler that we will add is minus to decrement the count, and in order to remove, we can add a handler of remove. So we have added 3 handlers inside the UI. We need to configure them inside the page model. By default, we were using the onPost, but this time we want different handler. But all the 3 handlers that we will be adding will be post handlers. So the naming convention for them is we will have to follow the onPost that we have been using so far, but after that we will have to append our handler name. So we have the plus handler, we will implement that, and in parameter we will be getting the cart ID that we are passing as the route parameter. So we have plus handler and we are getting the cart ID. Now what should happen inside the plus handler? We will retrieve the cart from database, so underscore unit of work dot shopping cart dot. We have the get first dot default based on the cart ID. Let's retrieve that. So we will say ID is equal to the cart ID. Once we retrieve that, on our unit of work, we have shopping cart dot increment count. Inside increment, we have to pass the shopping cart, and by how much do we want to increase? We just want to increase by 1 with our plus sign. So that looks good. With increment count, we do not have to save the changes, so we can ignore that. Next, we want to redirect back to the page of index. So we can say redirect to page, and we can give the complete path customer, cart, and index. So that will reload the page. That looks good for the plus handler. Let's run this and try that out. Let me log in here and go to our shopping cart. Let's increment the count. And you can see it is incrementing the count as well as the total is updating. So the plus sign is working as expected. Let's work on decrementing and remove in the next video. We have seen how to increment the count in shopping cart. With that comes your next assignment, in which I want you to add the logic to remove item from the shopping cart. We already have a button for that, so you will have to add a post handler based on the handler name and remove that item from the shopping cart. This will be pretty straightforward. Once you do that, the next thing that I want you to implement is decrementing the count. Decrementing will be similar to what we did with increment with one change. If the count is equal to 1, then you do not decrement that to 0. You will have to remove that from the shopping cart. So both the functionalities are pretty simple and straightforward. So implement both of them and let me show that in the next video. I hope you were able to complete the assignment. Let's do that together and compare what you did. We will copy the onPost, paste that one time, and first let me implement remove functionality because that will be much simpler. Let's make sure our handler name is correct. That looks good, and here we will just call remove and we will pass the cart object right here. Once that is removed, we will have to call unit of work dot save. After that we can redirect back, and that looks good. Let me copy this remove and paste it one more time here. Next we want to work on is minus. Make sure our handler name is correct. That looks good, and once we retrieve the cart in minus, we will have to check if cart.count is equal to 1. If that is equal to 1, then we do not want to decrement, we just want to remove. So we will cut this, paste it here. If that is not equal to 1, we want to decrement the count. So we can use this logic, copy the logic of increment, and call the method to decrement count by 1. And that's all that we had to do. Let me restart the application and test both the scenarios. Let's go to our shopping cart here. Let me log in. And let's try to decrement the quantity from 3 to 2. That worked, and you can see the price is also decrementing. Perfect. Now if we decrement it one more time, since the count is 0, it should be removed from the shopping cart. And great, that works as expected. Let's try to delete a shopping cart item, and it gets removed altogether. So with that, our shopping cart is fully functional. But I want to do one more thing. If there are no items in the shopping cart, I do not want to display a summary button and a total like this. I just want to display a message that please add items to the shopping cart. So if we go back, we can add an if condition right here. We will say if we have model.shoppingcartlist.count, if that count is equal to 0, in that case we will display a div which says please add items to the shopping cart, else we will display our shopping cart with the items. Let's save that, go back and refresh, and perfect, that looks good. If we add anything to our shopping cart, then we will see the items. So great, with this our shopping cart is fully functional. Let's continue in the next video. Next thing that we want to work on is the summary page, where we will display the complete summary and we will ask user to populate some details. Let me show you what exactly I'm talking about. We will first go to our cart controller and we will add a new razor page, which will be empty razor page for summary. And then for HTML and CSS, I like to give snippets. Inside section 9, we have the summary UI. Let me copy and paste that. This is just HTML and CSS code, as you can see. Let's go back to our index UI, and we have a button for summary at the very end. Let me add a link ASP page. It should take me to the summary page. Since it is inside the same folder, we can just say summary and run the application. So here, let's go to cart again and click the summary page. Perfect. You can see I have a summary which has back to cart. We have name, phone number, pickup date and time, and any additional instructions that we want. We also have to display an order summary for all the items in the shopping cart here. When they hit place order, we will redirect them to Stripe for payment. We will collect their payment and then we will place the order. When they hit on the place order, we will create an order inside the database and then we will redirect them to Stripe for payment. Once the payment is successful, then we will change the order status to be submitted rather than pending. That is just a brief flow of the application. But right now we need to work on the order summary page, and for that we need to create a new model. We want to create a model that will have all the details about the order, like name of the pickup person, phone number, date, time, and instruction. And then we also need to know that inside that order, what are the items that are being picked up. So we need to create two models. One will be order header and next will be order details. Typically, order header has all the summary level instruction and order detail has all the products or menu items in that order. Let's create those two models in the next video.